So it seems that Warhammer 40K has acquired another 3 detachments. Let's talk about some Terrors of the Deep, Sorcerous Chaos Space Marines and a Dark Angels War Host, with an overview of the new army rules for Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about Warhammer 40K's new detachments, taking a focused look at the new ones that Games Workshop's unleashed alongside the new balance update. This was a set of new detachments that we knew were already coming. Games Workshop had said that there will be new detachments coming out for 40k armies with each balance update in turn. Last time we had Custodes, Demons, Tau and Orcs, and several of those were really quite strong detachments for their respective armies, particularly the Orcs one which needed to get nerfed, and it seems that this time we've got Dark Angels, Chaos Space Marines and Tyranids. We already knew the armies that were getting content due to some early video uploads that had accidentally been scheduled in public view, and it does seem that the rumours for these were indeed correct. As soon as those had been scheduled, people came out with some very specific rumours as to what they'd contain. The Tyranids one does indeed appear to be a burrowing swarm doing subterranean assault things with Trigons and Morlocks. The Dark Angels one is an all very indomitable warforce for the Dark Angels, with a -1 to wound kind of similar to its Inner Circle style rules, and it turns out that one of my guesses for the Chaos Space Marine ones had turned out to be right. It's a Cabal of Chaos, so basically seems to be a new detachment focused around sorcerers, maybe in a similar sort of way to the Space Marine Librarius task force. All of these have gone live via their digital downloads now. They're similar in style to the Grotmus ones, where they're basically fully tournament legal right from the word go, and they had their points updated in the Minotaur and Field Manual. So for this one, let's talk through the new rules, what they bring to their armies, and some initial impressions and stuff that might be stronger in these detachments. First up, let's start with the Unforgiven, and for the Dark Angels, the detachment is called the Wrath of the Rock. The Dark Angels marching out from their fortress monastery in force, it seems, and to me this one doesn't really seem to have any enormous theme towards one facet of the chapter. It's more just a combined Dark Angels war host, doing standard Space Marine things, going in for a direct assault on the enemy, coordinating their Deathwing, Ravenwing, and their more standard chapter forces. Seems that the idea might have been to make another balanced detachment that does a bit better for the Unforgiven than their actual Unforgiven task force. That one was notably underwhelming. It still seems that the Lion's Blade hadn't done enough to punch through things like the Gladius and Stormlance that Dark Angels often play with in competitive games at the moment. It would be quite nice if the strongest thing for them was actually one of their unique detachments rather than borrowing ones from the core codex. In any case though, the detachment rule for this one is called Dutiful Tenacity, and for this one, whenever your infantry or mounted units get attacked, if the strength of the attack is greater than their toughness, it's -1 to the wound roll for them. So basically the detachment rule is a defensive one, and at least a fairly meaningful debuff. If you build largely around infantry and mounted units, the vast majority of attacks that are coming against them will probably be wounding on a 3+. Special weapons and heavy weapons usually being the best things to crack tough Space Marines, in particular things like Deathwing Knights. The rule feels particularly nice for them, given that they're already all about just marching up to the centre of the board and being very tough to kill with 4 wounds and -1 damage. This gives you another barrier to them getting cut down. Feels like it's got a bit of the same feel to the 9th edition Inner Circle rule, where you had a similar sort of vibe with only being able to wound Terminators on a 4+. This one should also be good for their other units though, any infantry and Ravenwing as well. Bikers are also units that you probably want to be firing special and heavy weapons at, so making them more resilient to those is nice. It definitely adds value, but a lot of the time in 40k you might still just have units get wiped out despite this. Sometimes it might only matter if the specific unit attacking your specific unit is able to wipe out the squad or not. Feels like it is going to be extra relevant for the Deathwing Knights, but might not always be quite as useful as other detachment rules if you had at least a fairly fragile for the point Space Marine unit that's destined for doom anyway. Moving on to the stratagems though, and first up for 2CP we've got Inescapable Justice. This one's basically used to redesignate your Oath of Moment target once it's been destroyed. After you've taken out your primary target, you can nominate one Astartes character model, and they can nominate an enemy unit within 12 inches of them, and then you'll get the big 4 rerolls to hit against that unit next. Even at 2 command points, that does seem at least solidly strong. You might have a bit more chance to activate it between Azrael and maybe something like a captain discounting it. Potentially could mean that you could shoot down one enemy unit in the shooting phase and then nominate a new unit to go at in the charge phase perhaps. Does seem potentially useful, but probably not a use every turn one, and you have to think fairly carefully about it at that sort of command point cost. For 1 command point, there's Lion's Will. This one you trigger in the command phase, and your unit gets +1 OC, and if they aren't a Deathwing, Ravenwing or Vehicle keyword unit, you also get +1 to hit for the squad as well. That feels like a bit of a 2-part stratagem really. The OC one feels like it could be justifiable just in its own right if you have a unit where that's literally going to tip the balance between you taking an objective or the enemy having it. Well worth it if it tips the balance just for its own bit, and then otherwise a +1 to hit isn't a bad damage boost for a unit, usually a +25% damage boost if your squad would hit on a 3 and doesn't have other sustained and lethal hit things going on. Could be nice enough with certain units like Hellblasters perhaps. I feel like for the most part, unless every tiny bit of damage output is absolutely critical in that one interaction, it might not be the single highest yield stratagem in terms of damage output though. Next up, for one command point, we've got Tactical Mastery. This one allows you to advance, shoot and charge, and that's just a really helpful one for the Dark Angels, and one of the reasons they get on with Stormlance and Gladius quite so well. It's really big for Deathwing Knights, Inner Circle Companions, and the Lion himself. They all get a bigger threat range if they can do that, and Ravenwing units can also fall back, shoot and charge with the stratagem as well, so it's got a dual use for them as well. Overall, that's definitely helpful. Maybe a slight shame that the other melee units can't fall back and charge something else, but still very nice to help them get there in the first place. For one command point, there's Relics of the Dark Age. This one's sort of a nod to the Weapons of the Dark Age stratagem of ages past. This one gives you +2 strength to your ranged weapons for an infantry or mounted unit. It's not just locked to plasma, though that still seems to be a pretty reasonable use of it against certain units. Hellblasters jumping up to strength 10 from strength 8 is pretty nice. The same for Ravenwing Black Knight Plasma Talons. That's going to make them far better against light vehicles and maybe Terminator equivalents. Could be nice on certain bolters as well if you absolutely need to shred some infantry. Suddenly getting strength 6 bolt guns out of nowhere could be nice to murderize some toughness 5 orcs. And it feels like it could be a good one for eradicators as well, having the potential to boost their firepower all the way from strength 9 to strength 11. That could mean that you'd be wounding certain vehicles on a 3+ with a reroll, which is just so much more reliable than 5+ with a reroll. Definitely one that you could get good value out of, but it's not going to matter for every single interaction. Then we've got Armour of Contempt. Seems that this one isn't being dispensed with like the Space Wolf Codex seems to. As usual, worsen AP by 1 against your unit, though the balanced data slate changed it so it only affects one unit and it can't affect, say, lots of units shooting you in the shooting phase. As usual, it's definitely a handy one to have. Generally going to be most meaningful against single really big units trying to wipe out your squads, good for things like 2+ saves in cover, and quite nice if it might threaten to tip the balance in a melee interaction as well. Perhaps enough of your models survive to strike back and then immediately hit the enemy hard. Finally, for one command point, there's Leonine Aggression, and this one's one of those charge out of sequence ones at the end of the enemy charge phase, and you can trigger it if your unit's within 3 inches of the enemy, or you've got a Deathwing unit within 6 inches of them. As per normal with these sort of heroic intervention style equivalents, you don't get the charge bonus when you charge in, so you won't be fighting first natively, unless you happen to have it anyway. This one's basically one that just forces the opponent to back off from your units unless they can handle them in close combat. If they don't want to be in melee with the Deathwing, they're going to have to stay greater than 6 inches away from them, and that could be really problematic for trying to get their forces up the board and maybe contest mid-board objectives. And it's pretty nice to be able to do that for the rest of your army as well. Even at 3 inches, that can still mean they can defend objectives pretty nicely. It seems very intimidating for all the most standard Dark Angels melee units. Inner Circle Companions with a Judas here will be able to step up and then hit the enemy first. Lionel Johnson could do it within 3 inches, and Deathwing Knights probably have the survivability to take a bunch of enemy damage before they hit back. It is quite nice to get this for 1 command point, it usually costs 2. Overall, definitely some good stratagems there. Advance and charge is really handy to have. The Weapons of the Dark Age one could encourage some different sort of infantry shooting kind of units to be taken, and then Oath of Moment +1 OC. Armour of Contempt and Countercharge all seem usable in the right situation. Then finally for the detachment, we've got the Enhancements. Tempered in Battle is a 10.1 for an aura of reroll battle shock and leadership test within 6 inches. I guess that doesn't hurt too much to have a little bit more reliability there, though at the same time it doesn't tend to be a reliably useful one. I'd probably see that as a points filler more than anything else. Ancient Weapons is 25 points, and that one's a very direct damage enhancement, +2 strength, an extra AP and +1 damage to a bearer's melee weapons. That seems pretty brutal for something like a Space Marine Captain. You could have them punching at strength 10, AP 3 and damage 3 with a power fist. Never mind the extra +3 attacks they get, that just seems like an all-around massively dangerous profile. Given the extra AP as well could be very good on a Chaplain or Judas here too. For 15 points there's Deathwing Assault. You give this to a Deathwing model and their unit can arrive from Deep Strike reserves round 1 regardless of the mission rules, and you do so in your movement phase, not in the enemy one, so this one won't be comboing with Rapid Ingress. That could mean that you could be deep striking Deathwing Knights right into the mid-board straight from turn 1, have an unreliable 9-inch chance at a charge, or potentially just hunker down in some terrain and dare the enemy to come anywhere near you. Definitely interesting for 15 points. You could give it to a Terminator Chaplain or Captain perhaps. Then for 10 points there's Lord of the Ravenwing. That one's Ravenwing only, and he gets 2 reroll advance and charge rolls for the unit. I guess you could combine that with the advance and charge stratagem for a Ravenwing squad, but to be honest it just feels like a bit of a points filler. I guess it doesn't hurt if you've got, say, a tooled up Black Knight squad led by Command Squad or something though. That could give them more reliability for getting across the board very fast. Overall, for first impressions on that one, there's definitely some interesting stuff there. The core rule is a handy buff to Deathwing Knights stomping up the mid-board and surviving there. Anything that makes them solidly harder to kill like that is not going to be good news for the foe. For the enhancements, I like the super fighty character one and the first turn Deathwing Deep Strike. They both seem like pretty reasonable options. Definitely good to have access to advanced shoot and charge, though admittedly they still don't get quite as much of it as Gladius or Stormlance can do. The charge out of sequence seems really nice, and again would really reward pushing up some Deathwing Knight squads nice and aggressively, and most of the other stratagems at least look okay. Looks like for this one you'd be wanting to skew to fairly heavy infantry and mounted units. Deathwing Knights and Inner Circle Companions both look like they've got multiple good things going for them there. As well, they'll definitely still be wanted to plug command points into those stratagems, and it could be pretty handy for small skirmish units out there as well, things like jump intercessors or outriders perhaps. They're going to be tankier if the opponent's -1 to wound against them. At first impressions for that one, I'd guess that it's solid enough, though not necessarily better than Gladius and Stormlance. Both of those add some really good stuff just with consistent advance and charge threat ranges, and some nice extra damage things and reactive moves. Will be interesting to see how this one competes against them in the long run. It would be nice if this one winds up becoming genuinely strong enough to compete with them, though I feel like with the other Dark Angels detachments they do offer other things as well. It just seems that the Dark Angels value the extra movement buffs and the other good support things for Gladius and Stormlance more. Let me know down in the comments whether you think that this one beats them or not though. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Only Games Crates. They're basically a subscription service that posts you out a small painting project every month, and they've given me perhaps a surprisingly generous discount code where you can get the first month of the subscription for a very small price tag indeed. The idea behind this one is that it's usually £15 or $19 for 3 3D printed miniatures to be shipped out to you each month. They feature a different creator each month, and they give you a discount voucher for the other things that that creator makes on their store, if you did like some of the designs and wanted to pick up a few more of them, I suppose. The designs for this month are these three on the right. A big heavy droid type thing, a sort of cowboy bounty hunter girl, and a guy blazing away with some assault rifles. If you use the code in the video description, which is Auspex Crate, in theory you only have to pay postage for them, so it should just be £6 in the UK, €8 in the EU, or $9 in the USA. I've had at least some people reporting that they might be able to get the whole thing for free though, so feel free to let me know if that works or not. If you do stay subscribed to it though, then it's the usual £15, €18 or $19 for future deliveries. Otherwise, beyond that, they also have a pre-coloured offering. Usually that's a specific coloured 3D printed miniature, but this time it looks like it's a custom built one from Eldritch Foundry. Might be of interest to some of you. And they also have a fantasy set going as well. In any case, for the sci-fi one, here's a few examples of their past crates. I personally enjoyed the Brainbug one myself when they sent me that one. It is quite a cool sculpt in person. In any case though, feel free to check them out, links down in the video description, if you like the idea of some random miniatures being shipped out each month. Thanks to them for sponsoring the video. Moving on though, and let's get back to those detachments. Next up we have the Tyranids one, which is the Subterranean Assault, and this one's all about the Trigons, Morlocks and Raveners bursting out from beneath the planet. This one's perhaps representing High Fleet Jormungandr somewhat, the idea being that these great burrow organisms make great big tunnels that burst their way towards the surface, and then a flood of smaller bogs and warrior beasts burst out from behind them to overwhelm the enemy from a surprise assault. For the army construction for this one, Trigons and Morlocks gain the Burrower keyword, and the Raveners already have it, and a few of the stratagems key off that one. On top of that, you can also nominate 2 Trigons if you have them to gain the character keyword, so you could count one as your Warlord if you wanted, and it means that you can give them enhancements, and there is an upgrade to upgrade one to a Trigon Prime. The core rule, or very fitting for the lore, is Surprise Assault, and the first part of this one is maybe kind of surprising. It just gives you reroll 1s to hit for your entire army, both shooting and melee. It's not the single biggest damage buff in the world, but it certainly helps out. That's plus 16% damage usually, and that is really quite nice to have for a detachment rule given to literally every unit all the time. I guess it might have a bit of overlap with things like Exocrine's shooting buff or any other sorts of rerolls that you might have out there, but it's definitely a handy one. Otherwise though, and perhaps the more themed bit, is this whole tunnel markers mechanic. When a burrower unit is set up on the board, you can place a 40mm based tunnel marker somewhere within 1 inches of your burrower unit that just emerged, and somewhere that's greater than 3 inches away from enemy models. Then when you set up any subsequent reserves units, you can opt to have them emerge from a tunnel marker, and when you do so, they can be placed anywhere within 9 inches of that marker, and then somewhere greater than 6 inches away from enemy models. That means basically you could have a Trigon turn up, put down a tunnel marker, and then have another melee unit just turn up right next to it, and just somewhere that's just outside of 6 inches of the enemy, all ready to make a very, very short charge on them. Enemy models can remove those tunnel markers though. If at any point they end a move within 3 inches of them, then the marker gets taken away, and given that they can allow access for lots of enemies to jump into combat with you really quite quickly, they're probably under quite high incentive to do so. Overall, between those, it does seem like a really interesting detachment rule, both giving you a flat damage across the army, and then followed up by some brutal close-range deep strikes, where the opponent's outlying units are just going to be in melee and there's not too much that they can do about it. You could be throwing things like melee specialist Auspexes, or some Carnifexes, or Tyranid warriors with melee weapons, and just get them straight into combat, almost no questions asked. Most of the burrows have interesting things about them emerging on the board as well, Morlocks dealing out mortal wounds, Trigons dropping close, and Raveners either burrowing on and off the board or doing free rapid ingress. Definitely feels like there's loads of options for combos with that rule between those. Onto the stratagems though, and for one command point there's adaptive optimization. This one gives a Morlock or Trigon the synapse keyword until the start of your next command phase, so it would help them be resistant to morale problems, a +1 strength for any melee attacks nearby, and maybe debuff enemy units foreshadowing the warp. I guess that might be highest yield if they're affecting multiple units within synapse range and giving them a damage buff, for example. Certainly could be a useful utility option, but ideally one that you wouldn't be using every turn. There is an enhancement to make one of those a synapse creature as well. For one command point there's replenishing swarms. One Tyranid unit wholly within 9 inches of a tunnel marker either heals D3+1 wounds to one model, or heals D3+1 wound models, so I guess you could restore a bunch of endless multitudes. Doesn't hurt to maybe restore a model to not be bracketed and not be -1 to hit anymore, or maybe make a charge a little bit closer for some multitudes. Feels like that one's alright really. Maybe could be nice on a Norn emissary or something where the wounds are quite hard to take off it. Seems like a reliable way to get value, but maybe not going to get crazy value out of your command points with that one. For one command point there's Tunnel Network, and at the end of your movement phase you can move one Tyranid's units from within 9 inches of one tunnel marker to within 9 inches of another. You do have to be wholly within both of them, but it does mean that you can basically teleport a unit from one tunnel marker to the other, and then they set up anywhere that's greater than 6 inches from enemy units, as if they were coming in from reserves. Given that that happens at the end of the movement phase, looks like you'd basically be able to have your units arrive from reserve, create those tunnel markers, and then move a unit from one to the other. I guess it could mean that you could move burrower markers back to another tunnel marker somewhere in safety, or use a slightly safer tunnel marker to throw units far across the board or change up what's fighting what. Definitely feels like an interesting utility one there. It might depend a bit on exactly what tunnel markers the opponent leaves standing and doesn't manage to wipe out though. For one command point there's Swarmy Assault. One Tyranid monster that was set up from reserves grants reroll charges to all Tyranids within 6 inches. That seems like quite a good one if you've got a whole cluster of charges to make nearby. Not really worth it for just one, as you just command point reroll that one instead. And perhaps it's going to be a bit borderline if you've got multiple close range charges. Again, you could maybe just risk command point rerolling if one goes wrong. I definitely feel like there's situations that you'd want to use that, particularly in this detachment. Maybe it could be nice enough if it makes the difference between, say, a Morlock getting into melee or not though. Next up, for one command point, there's Enfilading Emergence. This one's a damage buff to units that came in from reinforcements this turn. You get sustained hits 1 both at range and in melee, and also ignores cover as well, so it could be useful enough both for ranged units and for melee ones. I guess that's kind of dependent on one unit being big and scary enough to justify the buff. Might want to go for if it's just one of those positional fights where literally every bit of damage is going to matter in a really big way. Otherwise I guess use it on something really big and scary. Perhaps something like a Norn assimilator jumping out of a tunnel or similar, or a big unit of Zoanthropes or something. Finally, for one command point, there's Retreat Below. You can either nominate one Tyranid unit or 2 Burrower units, and they can return to reserves if they're not in engagement range at the end of the enemy fight phase. And that's rather good in this detachment where you've got lots of different options for how they get back on the board. It could allow Burrower units to return and strike again, and generate some more tunnel markers while doing so. Besides the standard Raveners that can do this natively, all the rest have some pretty interesting reasons they might want to do that. Trigons dropping close, Morlocks doing more mortal wounds, and the hyper-adapted Raveners could do rapid ingress again perhaps. It's pretty nice just for Tyranid units in general as well. Means they could be coming on from tunnels, but even just from standard strategic reserve, or having a big gun bug get line of sight on something else that it needs to, if it wouldn't have been able to shoot otherwise. Definitely a really powerful stratagem, and more so in this detachment. Then moving on, we've got 4 different enhancements. For 15 points there's Synaptic Strategy. Once per battle this unit can rapid ingress for 0 CP. I guess that could be interesting for one of your upgraded character Trigons. They could turn up somewhere 9 inches away from the enemy and be ready to make charges. I don't think you'd be able to combine it with their datasheet rule though. And rapid ingress is quite nice for just things turning up on the side of the board ready to strike in general. For 20 points there's Tremor Sensors. This one allows you to redeploy 3 units at the start of the game, and you can put them in strategic reserves when you do so. That could be a way to do the usual sort of wrong foot the opponent if you'd like to. Maybe put something on one side of the army and then move it to the other, or make sure that it's out of line of sight for a first turn strike or something. For this detachment though, you could just use it to increase the amount of units that you have in reserves. If you've hit the maximum amount of reserves that you can use in a game, this could be used to put 3 more units there. Next up, for 15 points, there's Vanguard Intellect. This one allows a Tyranid Deep Strike model to arrive turn 1 in your movement phase. It could mean that you could put a Trigon and a tunnel marker straight down somewhere on the board, or get a big block of Raveners up the field. Definitely feels interesting, though I'm just a little bit unsure as to the best way to get value out of that. It means you might just have one isolated borrower unit a fair way up the board, and if they use this to turn up in your movement phase, then in general they're going to need a 9-inch charge to get into the enemy if that's what they're aiming for. And if they're putting down a really aggressive borrower style marker, other units wouldn't be able to turn up turn 1, I guess, unless maybe the opponent had gone first and then he did something like a big Ravener unit returning to reserves, and then re-emerging via the tunnel marker themselves. I guess in theory if the opponent goes first, this one plus that could be a way to get a 6-inch charge with a 10 strong unit of Raveners, and that does seem pretty scary on paper. Finally, for 20 points, there's Trigon Prime. This one gives a Trigon the Synapse keyword, and on top of that it gets +1 strength and +1 weapon skill to its weapons. That means that given that Synapse also gives you +1 strength as well, that'll be 12 attacks at strength 11, AP 2 and damage 3 for a Trigon that hits on a 2+ with reroll 1s to hit from the detachment rule. That's really quite punchy, usually going to be 11 or 12 hits at that profile, and that could easily be enough to ruin a squad of Terminators or take down battle tanks. At 20 points that seems like a pretty reasonable one for one of the character Trigons. Overall, for first impressions, certainly seems like a really interesting detachment. Getting always on reroll 1s to hit isn't a small thing as well, and I feel like at least that means that everything in your army gains something useful. But then beyond that, it just looks like it's got some pretty great reserve manipulation things, and in particular lots of ways to get easy 6-inch deep strike charges, with borrower units turning up, throwing down a marker, and then even moving things around from one marker to another. Trigons feel like they'll be able to land pretty easily and set up those markers with their deployment rules if it's needed. The hyper-adapted Raveners could rapid ingress, maybe turn up somewhere that's hidden but also close enough to put an annoying tunnel marker down somewhere where the opponent won't be able to scrub it with a charge or something. And then it seems like there's some pretty great options for manipulating reserves, putting more units there and returning units to it. Quite a lot of fun stuff all in all. For standout units, obviously looks like you want to load up on those borrower units to access the core mechanic. Pretty much all of them have some good utility that you could use in different areas of the enemy army. Feels like you probably want a mix at first impressions. I feel like getting a Trigon Prime on the board could be nice though. There may be some scary melee threats to deliver via tunnels, perhaps melee warriors or Auspex, or something else that doesn't want to be shot up on the way in. And given the importance of deep strikes here, probably want to be having some units to do some chaff and board control, maybe some lictors for infiltrating, Biovore spore mines to prevent enemy deep strikers or advances, and perhaps some chaff units that move fast like Hormagaunts and Gargoyles to do a bit of move blocking if needed. Feels like this detachment could be significantly worse if the opponent just spreads out and takes up a whole bunch of the board, and then you can't do quite as many of your shenanigans. Overall, definitely seems interesting. For potential weaknesses, I guess reserves often only really add so much to an army. You're still going to need to commit to a fight and hold objectives and deal damage, and the limited unit pool for the borrowers means that at the very least you're paying 125 points now to put down one of those tunnel markers, so it means that delivering them is going to be at least fairly expensive, and to access the detachment in the first place you probably need a fair few of those, and people might not have loads in their collections. Overall though, does seem fun, pretty cool to explore another facet of Tyranid lore and another hive fleet I guess. Let me know your thoughts on the detachment down in the comments. Finally, last but not least, we have some Chaos Space Marine sorcery, and this one is called the Cabal of Chaos. The theming of this one is around Chaos Space Marine sorcerers and trying to represent a force led by them, their witchcraft lightly augmenting their own warriors and laying the enemies low with blasts of warp fire. This one does seem like the dark equivalent of the Space Marine Librarius Conclave detachment, and when that came out I did think at the time that it just seems kind of natural that it might mirror it with Chaos, and it turns out that was the case. The core rule for the detachment is called Empiric Wellspring, and this means that while making a Dark Pact, you get +1 strength to your ranged weapons if you're within 9 inches of a Psyker, and you get +1 AP to your melee weapons if you're within 9 inches of a Demon Prince or a Winged Demon Prince. So ideally ranged units want to cluster up around Psykers if possible, at least if they think that there's a reasonable chance that the extra strength would actually help out with a +1 to wound, and then melee units would get good support from a Demon Prince. Extra AP on things like Possessed and Accursed weapons is quite a nice bonus. Damage wise it is at least fairly helpful. The range strength buff is just really quite variable though. A lot of the time it just won't equate to a +1 to wound. It only seems to be stand out for certain units where they've got some good breakpoints on the go. The AP buff I'd say is more reliably nice, but it's just a bit harder to coordinate that kind of buff with multiple units charging side by side. Some units might charge out of range or one might fail the charge, and having a big expensive Demon Prince needed to actually deliver the buff might not be the most efficient use of him. It's all well and good if he can go charging alongside and deal his own damage too, but if it's kind of making you use him in a way that's counter to his main purpose, then it just might not add a crazy amount of value for you. For Stratagems, for 1 command point there's Baleful Blessing, a 5+ feel no pain type save against mortal wounds. That's nice enough in the right matchup or situation if you just desperately need to tank a few more of them for a unit to survive. In some games though it's just not going to be a particularly big deal. For 1 command point there's No Rest in Death. 1 unit within 9 inches of a Psyker or Demon Prince either heals D3+1 lost wounds or restores D3 battle line infantry models. I guess that might equate to something along the lines of 30 points or so returned to the board, which isn't nothing. Again, it could be used to allow something like a vehicle or monster not to be bracketed and not be -1 to hit anymore, or battle line units to shorten a charge distance with an enemy if the foe did politely leave your unit half killed. Again, this one feels like it's a little bit on the borderline for the sheer value side of things. Good enough in a pinch, but for sheer value it might not be as much of a swing as some command points might be. I guess potentially you could combine it with a Warpsmith. That could at least allow for 2d3+1 wounds restored on a vehicle, which might be enough to basically undo a lot of the enemy's hard work. For 1 command point, there's Soul Seekers. This one gives you ignores cover for a unit making a shooting attack. I feel like for most damage output that's not going to be absolutely crazy in terms of yield. It would depend on the exact unit being targeted and how important every failed save is. Probably one to use situationally as opposed to plug in repeatedly. I guess in theory, weirdly enough, it could be good on something massive like a Lord of Skulls. I'm sure he'd be very angry to be in this detachment. For 1 command point, there's Unholy Haste. An infantry unit can advance and charge. This one's nice for a possessed unit or a unit of Chaos Legionaries perhaps, chosen able to do it anyway. Definitely a useful one that maybe helps it compete just a touch more with things like Renegade Raiders or Creations of Bile. For 1 command point, you can throw out some more mortal wounds with Mutation's Curse. 1 enemy unit within 12 inches and visible takes some mortal wounds as per the list. If you roll a 1, it's 1 mortal wound. If you roll a 2 to 4, it's D3 mortal wounds. And then on a 5 or 6, it's 2d3. It's not bad, though it's maybe a sort of slightly more flexible grenade style attack. I think with average rolling, it's actually a tiny bit lower yield than grenades, but it's a bit more flexible as to how you can use it. You can use it while you're in melee or having fallen back or things. So quite nice to be able to deal some damage when you might not otherwise be able to attack at all. Finally, for 1 command point, there's Shroud of Chaos. This one gives you a 6-inch aura of stealth for a Demon Prince or Psyker, declared at the start of the enemy shooting phase, so you need to do it before they've been declaring attacks against your units ideally. Feels like if you've got a clutch of Chaos units out in the open and the opponent's going to be trying to kill them this phase, then it could be at least fairly high yield. You could get the -1 to hit on a bunch of different units that are trying to get shot in turn. As it goes, that seems like an alright shooting debuff to me. Finally, we've got the Enhancements. For 10 points, there's Touched by the Warp. This one just gives you the Psyker keyword for better access to the Detachment's core rule and a few of the stratagems. It could mean that you could still have a very fighty character like a Chaos Lord and still use the detachment options if you'd like. In theory, I guess you could give it to a Demon Prince, and then that model would be provider of both buffs. Not too bad, while Demon Princes get Lone Operative next to Infantry now. Seems like it could be pretty good on a Warpsmith though. You could have him sitting around with a bunch of demon engines, make them shoot straighter and put them back together, and also have a bunch of weapons firing off with +1 strength. Next up, we've got the Eye of Zadesh. This one's 25 points and gives the Bearer's unit a 6-inch scout rule. That could be nice for getting possessed up the board, moving them 6 inches with a Master of Possession in tow. That'd be quite nice if you could combine it with trying to get the extra AP from a Demon Prince advancing alongside. We could use it in a Rhino full of Chosen. You don't have to have the Psyker keyword for this one, so you could put it on a Chaos Lord or something. That one easily seems usable enough. Maybe not a crazy steal at 25 points though. Next up, we've got the Mind Blade at 25 points. This one is a Psyker only one, and weapons in the Bearer's unit gain the Lance keyword. Again, this could be very nice on a Master of Possession with the Possessed, to actually give them a genuinely good damage buff when they're charging in. Seems solid on a Terminator Sorcerer or regular Sorcerer as well, maybe accompanying some Chosen or Legionaries. Still probably feels a little bit on the borderline side for those though, at least compared with a fighty Chaos Lord. Finally, we've got Infernal Avatar for 20 points. This one's for a Demon Prince or a Winged one. They get +2 strength and +1 AP on their melee weapons, so for the average Demon Prince that would be 6 attacks at strength 10, AP 3 and damage 3, with any additional buffs that they get from Dark Pact, and presumably they get the extra AP buff from the detachment as well. So I guess those attacks will be at AP 4, and they do get some inbuilt rerolls too potentially. Overall, between all those boosts, it's a fairly stacked melee profile. That'll definitely make him a very nasty countercharge threat. I wouldn't hurt for a winged one either, as a chase down to all those mortal wounds that is hopefully inflicted first. Overall, again, I feel like there's some interesting stuff here. The detachment rule definitely isn't useless, though maybe feels a little bit hard to make use of. Lance on a unit is fairly chunky, the Scout's buff is handy enough as an enhancement, maybe the advance and charge on infantry and the stealth aura both seem like they're fairly reliable to get value out of. Most of the rest seem alright in the right situation though. I guess for this one you'll generally want Psykers and Princes for the army to function in the first place. Kind of nice that the Demon Prince got that lone operative special rule, which might help a little. Possessed and Legionaries both seem like options that make good use of a few of the different options here. And as mentioned, Forge Fiends with a Warpsmith or maybe even Vashtor could be nice enough. You could get a big +3 strength there, though I feel like kind of the detachment rule is almost the bonus bit, and it's Vashtor doing most of the heavy lifting at that point though. Probably for the biggest weaknesses for this one, regular sorcerers and the Masters of Possession just aren't really very good as data sheets in their own right at the moment, unfortunately. Feels like they've been some of the ones that have been struggling the most for the Chaos Space Marines up to now, and Demon Princes are a bit on the niche side too, at least compared with other stuff you can field. I'm not really the most convinced by the stratagems out of this detachment, and the rule just feels a little bit on the clunky side, and not always particularly high yield when it goes off, at least compared with some of the other good stuff that Chaos Space Marines can use, creations of Bile or Renegade Raiders or Packbound. Overall, at first impressions, I feel like I'm least optimistic about this one being any good. I strongly suspect that this one won't be on the same sort of level as their strongest detachments. I pushed on the pile of more fun and fluffy ones for more casual games, and people wanting to build around some cool warp users. It definitely wins some fun points for style and theme. Let me know your thoughts on the new detachments though. It'll certainly be interesting to see how these perform when they hit tournaments and things. Let me know which ones you think will be strong, if any of them, and any other cool combos or implications that I might have missed here. I'm sure there's lots, given that this one's a first take really. Thank you to Only Games and their crates for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description, and certainly use that Auspex crate code if you want a significantly discounted one on the first order, and you like the idea of a few printed miniatures turning up in the post each month. In any case though, I'll leave that one there for now. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll be back pretty shortly to talk some Chaos Knights it seems, so check back or subscribe if you'd like to see that. If you'd like to support the channel, bear in mind the channel has a Patreon page which is linked down in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.